Welcome to Let's Talk Learning Technology. Do you know the latest in learning technology? Matt and Walter do. From learning authoring tools and animation to virtual reality and everything in between, innovative learning groups Matt Kurtin and Walter Schirmacher geek out on all of it. Get their perspectives on the latest trends, tips and tricks, and recommendations so your learning tech keeps up with the times.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Let's Talk Learning Technology, or as we affectionately refer to it, LT Squared. I'm Matt Kurtin, the Senior Director of Technology and Visual Design at Innovative Learning Group.
And I'm Walter Schirmacher, a programmer at ILG. With us today is Claire Hedgespeth, Head of Production and Marketing at Avatar Dimension. Thank you for joining us today, Claire.
Hi, Walter. Hi, Matt. Thank you so much for having me.
So to kick off today's episode, why don't you tell us a little bit about Avatar Dimension? What is it and what do you all do?
So Avatar Dimension is a mixed reality capture stage. We are outside of Washington, D.C., and we specialize in volumetric capture, which is a particular type of video that is used in augmented reality, mixed reality, virtual reality.
So we're really interested in this. Walter and I both are Unity programmers who have done some VR work. And one of the things that we developed is a best practice skills training for VR that teaches employees who work in a clean manufacturing space how to operate properly. And we have some avatars in that. Some of them help you carry equipment that's heavy. Some of them show you how quickly it's okay to walk in the room. And we did a lot of thinking as we were developing that. Ours are 3D model-based avatars, and we're proud of the results we got. But when we were trying to achieve that level of realism, it was a lot of struggle of how much processing can you put in before it will be more than what the Quest headset could do. How realistic does it need to be for the learners? We're really interested in how the volumetric video approach is different than the other ways to do avatars and how that might make things better.
So volumetric video is really about, it's more than motion capture, where you're doing like a stick figure that's just doing the mechanics of how someone moves. It is more than photogrammetry, which is sort of what they're doing with Ready Player Me in terms of just capturing an image of what you look like. It's mixing of the two so that you create the outward topography of what someone actually looks like, how they move, the way in which they speak, not only just, my mouth moves and a voice comes out of it. We are looking to actually have the authentic gestures, tics, and expressions that come through in our virtual humans and our avatars, and things that allow you to actually feel like the person is right there with you.
So that's awesome. It sounds like you get a really high fidelity output of what the original person was doing. Is the output that gets produced like a 3D model or more like a video or a little bit of both?
We stress trying to do a full video of what they say and are doing in the moment. So you actually end up with a full 3D MP4, which is video plus audio plus the mesh of what their skin, hair, clothing is layered on top of that then gets used into Unity, into Unreal, into any digital 3D modeling software that you have. And then because you have that in full 360, you can move it to be at any perspective that you would like.
So it sounds like you would be able to, if you shot that video, walk around and look at all the different points of view of that recording.
Yes, we actually film it with a full 360 stage of 70 cameras that are, it's a combination of lasers, it's a combination of RGB cameras, and a combination of infrared cameras. So that you are literally looking at this point on my nose in space, in a voxel versus a pixel, and you are able to see the mesh on top of it and where it is at any point in time.
I think it's really interesting what you're doing. Have you produced SDKs, or how does your work get incorporated into tools like Unity?
Well, there are many different ways that we've sort of used the technology. We've done it in a full VR sense when it comes to a performance. One of the things that we had with COVID, and sort of this technology really helped when we ended up in COVID and we were away from people, being able to actually have the feeling that you were in the room with people. We actually were able to partner with theaters when they wanted to do an actual performance, but people couldn't go to the theater. So we actually did what was called a space opera. They wanted to put on this opera, so we filmed all of their performers singing and performing the opera, and then put them in a unreal digital futuristic space. And so that in that way you can then anchor it in any place in your 3D model.
So when I think about it, probably the closest thing I think I've seen to what you're talking about is some of the off-the-shelf fitness training apps that you can purchase. They'll have an avatar giving you instructions before you start your workout. But I have a sense that maybe it's not quite as sophisticated because they have them placed kind of a little way back where you can kind of look at them a little, but you can't walk all the way around them. So maybe they're doing that to save space, or maybe it's just a different technology in capturing the video to begin with. Aside from how this might be used for entertainment or marketing or games, how do you see this being used in the future in general? Like, what might change about this over the next 5 years or so?
Well, I will say that we have done a proof of concept with a yoga instructor and been able to look at that. One of the benefits of what we are working with is that we can do resolutions up to 4K and up to 60 frames per second. So it can be a big file. We're talking about lots of data that we're generating here, but it might be far away because the actual resolution and the size of the package might be a little too small for it to be able to see it that closely. We want you to be able to see it that closely. And so the things that we have been working with this on are doing marketing PSAs. The same way that you can do, a yoga instructional video, you can do a PSA to an entire arena who's come to watch a game. We've done that for a college basketball team where they had a game, and we were able to do PSAs about getting vaccinated. And we were able to use a coach and a very famous player to tell people about it so that they could help with that effort. We've used it in marketing in terms of software that has been launched and that they want a accompanying video. We've seen it in businesses where, you talk about doing manufacturing. I think that manufacturing with the creatives is the biggest place that this is going to be because your builders and your developers are all over the world. How do you get them to work on the same project, on the same model at the same time? And this is the biggest thing that will be sort of that Web3 push. We've also done web tours where you couldn't go to a place. You couldn't go to Egypt. You don't have the ability to go to Asia, but maybe you can do a web tour of a facility. And what you want for that facility is to be able to actually have a person taking you around. And so that's one way that we have also used this technology. I think that also medical is a big, big place where VR and virtual humans has a place when you talk about diagnostics in terms of actually being in a room with someone who's breathing hard, has a rash, being able to have them tell you their story and try and figure out what's happening with them. As well as VR therapy. It's already a thing right now. I believe at Cedars-Sinai to have actual virtual therapy for PTSD victims, for autism, for people that need behavioral cognitive therapy. And so I think virtual humans is the way that you make all of these sciences and these interactions with patients and being able to train the next generation of doctors to be able to utilize the skills that they learn.
So when I think about where the overlap of some things that we've done in the past, like that tour of the building, we do that for new employee orientations with the 360, almost like a Google Maps indoors where you can go and tour around the building. But it sounds like what you're really adding by having the video quality that you have in the volumetric video is you're adding a realisticness and an authenticity that you don't get with animated characters, that it makes it maybe more meaningful because it's more like real life.
It sounds like you're also adding not just the dimension of here's a 3D tour of the building, but here's a 3D tour of the building led by a virtual person.
Right, yeah.
So you're getting that real personalization that really helps connect to people. And it's that connection that really makes a difference to people and makes it more real.
I think especially in marketing. I mean, are you going to listen? I mean, yeah, maybe I'd listen to a cartoon of Big Bird, but, you know, I feel like I would rather listen to a real life person. Like, I want to hear what Barack Obama says. I want to hear, you know, what Jimmy Carter thinks of this. Like, you know, I know I'm using presidents and that's completely like out of the realm, but it's like, I want to hear what these people have to say. And if it looks like them and sounds like them and it feels like them and I feel privileged enough to experience them, I'm going to pay more attention.
Yeah. I mean, I know there's one of the challenges with virtual reality is something called the uncanny valley, which I'm sure you're probably familiar with that. But for those who are listening, it's the whole concept of where you have you're interacting with like a robot or an artificial person and you can just tell it's not real. And it throws you off and it gives you this sense of unease is the easiest way to describe it. I don't know if you've heard it described other ways, Matt.
Yeah, I mean, typically people talk about it as is completely not realistic, no concern. As it starts to become more and more realistic, when it's partly realistic but not all the way, it becomes creepy. And then when it's all the way realistic, again, it's okay. But when it's almost realistic but not, it can be creepy. That's the thing.
And it sounds like what you're adding is because you could, you know, add a virtual, like an avatar or something to help lead the tour or whatever, or training or whatever you're doing. But the problem is you get into that uncanny valley problem of what's getting really realistic, but it's not quite realistic enough, and you can get that unease feeling. So then you either have to get it to be really, really real by using a technology like this, or you have to back it off and make it before you get to that threshold that it will bother people. So, I mean, it sounds like that you're trying to help overcome that dimension.
Yes.
And then the other point that you're making, Claire, which is that one person's really the expert on a topic. You want to hear from that actual person, not just some person.
Definitely. I will also mention that one of our missions, particularly with Avatar Dimension, is to use this technology for preservation, especially cultural preservation. We have been working with Native American tribes across the United States, including the Osage in Oklahoma, and we're looking to work with a couple of tribes in Washington State. And we really want to use this to capture their heritage, their traditions, their elders. Their elders are dying off. Their language is dying off. This is very important for their next generations to know and to see these people who are their heritage, are their ancestry. And so that's something that we are looking to generate more assets for in order to create that archival narrative history.
Yeah, a lot of that cultural preservation, when I've seen it in the past done, is it's not just like, here's a video about this topic. It's actually like getting into and actually like experiencing firsthand sources and actually hearing the recordings and reading the actual documents, reading the diaries. I watched a whole thing about Agatha Christie, and I learned so much about her because it was actually her words and her voice recorded on audio tape, really early, primitive, really old audio tape, but it meant so much more, and I learned so much about how she developed her writing and what her writing style was from listening to her directly from her first source versus someone else summarizing it. So I understand, it's a very important thing for cultural heritage to preserve that, because otherwise you get someone's view of the cultural heritage versus this is really what it is. It kind of dovetails into training, where you preserve cultural heritage and you get into this is training you to learn about the history of ours. I mean, so that's one aspect you can use this for. But how do you see using avatars for training solutions as compared to other things like games and marketing? I mean, you mentioned cultural heritage, but how else do you see this being used?
I see this being, the way to actually mitigate some of the issues that come up when you are actually thrown into situations. That uncertainty of what do I do now? when you are a policeman and you are thrown into a situation with, 3 different people who are having an argument, if you are actually able to really feel like the people are there and you might be in danger of something bad happening to you or to one of the other people, if you've already experienced that and have in a safe space, experience it in a safe area where you can make mistakes and learn from those mistakes and learn to also police yourself and to mitigate your own reactions to that experience, then you are able to go out into the world and do your job at a better efficiency and a better results happen because you have been able to have that more authentic experience than feeling like you were playing a video game of what it's like to be in a hostage situation.
I agree. That's a perfect example when you get a chance to practice something before you have to encounter it the real life. You've had a chance to practice it in virtual reality first. And again, if it's more realistic, the better the practice.
So, it sounds like you're helping make connections then, because so much of training is about connecting with either the material or the subject or the person that you're learning from. And it sounds like this helps you make a deeper connection possibly than you could with just a regular avatar.
I'd agree.
Claire, when I first ran across your profile on LinkedIn, I noticed that you were from UVA. And full disclosure, I went to Virginia Tech. So I guess if we were at a sporting event, we'd have to be rivals. But here we can be on the same team. I also noticed that you got your degree in music and that you had a lot of production work for a bunch of musicals, it looked like. How did you make that transition from being a music major over to the role that you have now? I'm really curious about that.
Well, first off, wahoo wah. It's really, I find it very interesting that my work experience has just drawn on so many different experiences and passions that I've had over my lifetime. I actually went to UVA as a CS, computer science major in the scholarship program and the engineering school. But before that, I was doing, even during, actually, I started doing theater back in elementary school, on and behind the stage. And, I started learning piano at the age of 7. So when I went to UVA, after having done 4 years of computer science in high school, and didn't really realize that being an engineer was a lot more of a 24/7 technical mind than I really wanted to be. It really just fizzled for me. But I found my core as my creative parts of myself. Going back on that, music was a foundation of something that I could draw on, of something that I actually love to do. But I didn't think I was going to necessarily have a job in music. But it allowed me to find a different aspect of music because I ended up doing electronic music. And I ended up actually doing a lot of electronic programming and actually built a theremin for my senior project. So a completely other direction. And then coming out of college, what do you do with a music degree? Well, I'm still in the creative. Even when I was changing my major from CS to music, I was working on a musical on the side. So when I came out of college and was like, well, I can still do production. I could still help produce theater. I could still figure out how that world worked. And part of it, doing music in theater is something that I loved. And so I started working on commercials, and I worked on a movie. And then I worked on television doing series and documentaries, and sort of worked my way from being a production assistant to actually doing development at a television production company and actually pitching to cable networks in DC. And I've also worked on a political show, which I have to say, doing that in DC, very draining, incredibly draining. And not what I thought I was going to do, even though I was doing video production in DC. But then it was figuring out how to be a producer in the technical world. I relearned how to do editing. I branched out in terms of like, oh, I know computers, I can edit a video. And then realizing that one of the aspects that I love when it came to pitching cable networks was figuring out the brands of those cable networks and how everything sort of fit together to create a good show, or how one show could be on different networks based on the little tiny nitpicking of who their audience was. And so that's when I went into more of marketing and a branding side in terms of public relations. And so, I've just kept on learning new things and ended up coming back to sort of the technical portion because I was asked to do this job since I was a good producer and since I knew that production world, but it had that technical aspect that me as a STEM kid, I get it. I understand definitely less than my technical director, but I get, I know enough to be dangerous. And I'm still trying to be creative and actually work on the branding of this company. So it's sort of been an amalgamation of all of my experiences.
Well, yeah, that really resonates with me because it sounds like what you found is the intersection between the creative parts and the technology. And on our side, what we found is the intersection between our passion for producing training that really helps produce business results and the technology. So we share that overlap of what it is we like to do with the technology that you do with the creativity. Coming out of that, you have kind of a different mindset than others might have because you have the creative melded with the technology. As you look forward, what type of an impact do you think that Web 3.0 might have on what you're doing?
So I think it's going to be very interesting because as much as we talk about Web 3.0, no one has a really clear idea of what that is going to look like. When we talk about metaverse, no one has any idea what that it really is. And we sort of know in our minds that it is going to be it's going to be a real incorporation. We already do have an incorporation of AR and VR and mixed reality, but it's going to be so ingrained that it's going to just shift everything. In the same way that it shifted from every fifth person had a computer or a cell phone, 30 years ago. Now everyone does, and you can't actually function without it. It's going to be interesting to figure out where the Web 3.0 sort of puts us when it comes to the AR, VR. We would like for the virtual humans to be a very big part of that in terms of allowing people to have those authentic experiences and being able to have that in your everyday life. And I think that is really what 3.0 is going to do for everybody.
Not to mention that everybody and their brother and their sister are all talking about how AI is going to impact things too. I can imagine that in the future you would take these type of recordings and then AI would try to take the recorded video because you have all those points and then try to have them say something new that they didn't even say yet, but that may be out in the future.
That is my biggest fear. That truly is my fear that ChatGPT, GPT-4, whatever it is, generative AI, I feel like humans just need to continue to be involved. And, that's why we are in the business of videos, not just rigged images that can be used. I know that, there are companies that work on capturing hundreds of thousands of different facial expressions or different voice things so that they can actually duplicate themselves. And my thing is, you should stop because frankly, that is where we're going to be in trouble. When you actually have someone who sounds, you're going to have someone have a actual AI model that looks and sounds like me, but I'm not talking to you. I'm, on vacation or somewhere. I think that is just that is going to be a downfall when it comes to the authenticity of Web 3.0. And it's going to lead to things like misinformation. It's going to lead to things like libel, slander. Like, there's so many things that can happen when you take the actual human out of the equation. Even though we want to create authenticity, we want that authenticity to be from that actual person.
It sounds like you've already talked about it a bit, but as a kid and as a teenager and a young adult, I read a lot of cyberpunk and dystopian future stuff because that was just me back then. But do you worry about like the ethics of all this happening, where like the whole convergence of like AI and the virtual people come together and then kind of replace people in essence? I mean, does that kind of an ethical thing worry you at all?
It definitely does when it comes to things like, well, when you say reading all this sci-fi, I'm a big fan, and I'm pretty sure this is in the movie and not in the book. For Ready Player One, one of my favorite lines is, never trust someone you meet on the Oasis. They might be a 300-pound guy named Chuck in their basement. And, it's so hard to know who's real, but it's hard to know who's real right now in terms of Twitter. Do you actually want to put a face to that? Do you want to put a face on your bots that are talking to people? So, yes, there are definitely hard questions when it comes to this. I think if you use it for the right things, it's figuring out exactly what are the use cases for this that make sense. You could have the issue if you wanted to do speakers. If you had a speech that you need to do in Singapore, but you can't make it to Singapore, do you send a volumetric video of yourself doing the video? I mean, essentially, it's kind of like uploading a YouTube video and saying, here, play this instead of me being here. There are definite ways that could go wrong, is really the issue. Even one of our biggest projects that we actually did all the crowd capture for the new Whitney Houston biopic. If you've seen I Want to Dance with Somebody and you looked at all of their performances in the stadium, in the theater, in the small Oprah studio, all of those people are actually volumetric humans. And so you have the ability to just put in a human who is doing an action, and it feels like you're actually able to have people there. There's a talk about eventually maybe actors are just going to sell their image, a virtual human image, as an NFT and say, hey, rig it to do what you want for the movie. I might get final approval, but you get to go and make my person do whatever they want. I mean, I'd rather see Tom Cruise than CGI Tom Cruise.
I mean, I guess with any technology, the technology is there, then it could be either used for good or bad. So we need to strive in our training solutions to make sure to use it for good.
Yeah. I know, and I think one thing you mentioned, Claire, that was important. As long as you have people involved still, that helps, because that's where you actually can watch and help manage where things are going. It's one thing just to create something, but actually having someone involved in it who's actually related to it is important. I mean, my wife and I talked about the music industry and what happens when they do the remixes of someone's audio. And her opinion, which was pretty good, is as long as the original artist is involved, they're still involved in the recreation of their music. So it's still their work, even if it's an upgraded surround sound version of something from the 70s. At least this way, the person still has their say in it versus just someone else just remixes it and whoever it was doesn't even know about it. I mean, so I think as long as you get someone involved and actually get their input, I think that's important.
Definitely.
Well, let's say that we work our way through past the concerns about the ethics of it. The next question I think people are going to have is, what does this stuff cost kind of on an order of magnitude? Is this the type of stuff that you need a big budget kind of approach in order to be able to use?
Well, so that's where I think that volumetric video is going to be a little bit interesting in terms of how much people feel that they need to use it. Adaptations are going to be slow, and the cost is going to be a little bit of a barrier for a lot of people. But I think that's one of those where the benefits are going to outweigh the costs, truly. For the cost, there are really 3 different sections that we bill based on. The first part is the stage, and me as the producer, the technical director, and the cost of the stage, whether you're doing half a day or a full day. Pretty much you have all of that time to film. And so, a half day is 5 hours, a full day is 10 hours. So you're just paying for all of that. And then on top of that is sort of the freelance costs when you talk about sound, hair and makeup. Do you need a teleprompter? Do you need motion capture? All of that on top of that. And then after the filming comes the processing cost. So you may have filmed for 6 hours on a full day, but how much of that are you actually going to process? Are you going to process a minute or are you going to process 10 minutes? Frankly, if you don't have $15,000 to spend on this, it's not really worth your time, and probably a 2D video is going to work better for you. But, it is worth the squeeze because, frankly, we use the Microsoft software when it comes to processing our assets. And that means that an actual editor goes through and frame by frame makes sure that there aren't any artifacts, that everything looks good, and that quality is what makes the authenticity of the final asset really pop versus other avenues.
When that processing step is happening, is that what they call stitching it, or is that not the right term for what you're doing in that step?
That's not the right term. I really don't go beyond processing because there are many different things that are happening when it comes to the actual, you're dealing with the mesh itself, you're dealing with the lighting, you're dealing with the form as it moves. And so there are just a lot of different processes that go into it.
So, it sounds like film post-processing, but much more complex because of all those cameras.
Yes, and because, when you are doing something like this, you actually even have to think of this as theater. It has to be done in one take. Because if I'm going and I'm giving a speech and I mess up halfway through, and then you say, oh, we can just stitch it together. Well, my hands may not be in the same place that they were. And it's worse than if it's a 2D video where you can possibly meld between. You're trying to meld between different assets in 3D, not in 2D.
All right, from every point of view.
Exactly.
Well, Claire, I want to thank you so much for your time today. This has been a really interesting discussion. Lots of big picture ideas to think about here, and fascinating to learn the details of how the technology works. Is there anything else that you'd like to share?
I guess I would say, you're all about, talking about how to learn about technology and the training and the technology. I guess sort of the main things I would say is, people need to just keep learning, whether it's, large and small, whether it's just listening to more podcasts, whether it's, researching on Google, learn, and surround yourself with other creatives within your industry, people who are looking to expand their work, to innovate their work, to, figure out how to make their work happen and to execute it. And then I would finally say, just listen to everyone out there and not just the people who agree with you. You are the sum of your experiences. And so your best self is finding your true self. And so when you figure out that, then you can figure out how to make it work for you and your passions in your life and in your job.
Thank you for sharing.
Oh, thank you. We really appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much.
If you want to learn more about AR and VR, we posted some resources at the bottom of this episode's page. We've also posted information about Avatar Dimension. If you have any learning technology topics you'd like us to talk about, Matt and I are on Twitter. You can also send us an email at marketing@innovativelg.com. Thank you for listening.